Hi guys, welcome to the first Draw With Me video, and today I'm going to show you how I made my YouTube banner. The tools I use for creating this artwork is the iPad 10.5 inch, the Apple Pencil, and the Procreate app, which you can purchase for $9.99 on the App Store, and it's just a one-time fee compared to Creative Cloud's reoccurring fees. I'm going to walk you through 6 steps, which include preparation, the guidelines, the outlines, the color, the texture, and the text overlay. So let's get started. So in regards to preparation, the first thing I did was to find a template for the banners. And I just did this by searching on Google Images. And I used this template as a guideline. It's the first layer that I created in my artwork. The reason I wanted a guideline is because there are different dimensions depending on which device you're using. So for example, if you're watching YouTube on the TV, then you'll be viewing the banner at its full size, which is 2560 by 1440. But for example, if you're looking at YouTube on your desktop or mobile, as most people do, then the size is a lot smaller and you're restricted to only seeing a certain area. So I wanted to be able to see all the guidelines so I could see where I needed to put the text so people could see it on any device. So I created a new file in Procreate according to the largest dimensions, and then I placed the template as a photo. With this layer, I reduced the opacity to about 20%, enough so you can still see it, but not enough so that it's the main focus. So moving on to the second step, which are the guidelines. I knew that I wanted to draw flowers on my banner because I really like flowers and I feel like it would have a lot to do with my illustrations and tutorials moving forward, so I felt like it would be a good place to start. So I started off by creating a new layer on top of that template and kind of just drawing circles to get an idea of where I wanted to place the flowers, as well as size. Now I kind of just drew these really roughly, and I also lowered the opacity of this layer. Once I finished drawing all the circles, I made these perpendicular lines to dictate what orientation the flowers would be facing. And then in a new layer, I will start sketching the flowers. And I just did this part really roughly because, again, it's just serving as a guideline or a vague idea of what the flowers will actually look like when I complete my artwork. So for this one, I'm drawing peonies. I really like peonies. I think they're really pretty. And I think the first time I drew a peony was probably last year. Definitely the best way to practice is to just take a photo and try to replicate it as best as you can. And then from there on, you'll be able to develop more of your own style. So I first started creating illustrations like these back in 2016. I had taken a break from college temporarily to focus on some personal matters. And it was really during that time that I was able to develop my own style with these. They started off as just black and white line and dot drawings is what I like to call them. One of my biggest inspirations when I was starting was Kiki Yang. She's another YouTuber, and I remember watching one of her videos where she kind of walks you through how she makes her illustrations, and that was really a great starting point for me when I was first trying to learn how to draw in this style. So once I'm done with roughly drawing out all the sketches of the flowers, I'll create a new layer on top and begin the outline. Now, I don't always do this if I'm going to be coloring it in, but it does help with being a little more accurate and kind of just being more thorough with the process. brush that I'm using is the Studio Pen, and this is a brush that's already available when you purchase Procreate. They have a bunch of presets for brushes. But what I like to do is I go into the adjustments or properties, and I kind of play around with like the streamlining and size and things like that until it gets to a place where I'm comfortable drawing with it. I also don't always follow my sketches 100% to the T. I kind of make little tweaks along the way depending on what kind of looks better. I think I first made the transition from pen and paper to digital work in 2017 or 2018, and the first device I did it on was the Surface Pro 3. I actually started doing it at my last company that I worked at, and I would create a lot of these like hand-drawn illustrations for our social media or internal marketing, which is really fun. And it was a time where I learned a lot about like digital artwork. I think digital artwork and traditional artwork, they both have their pros and cons to me. There's definitely some kinds of drawings that I like to do more on pen and paper just because there's some effects that you can't replicate exactly digitally. For example, I used to do, or I still do a lot of like a stippling effect, which is basically just creating a lot of dots to make the illusion of shading. And that's something that you can't really do in Procreate with the same motion as you do on pen and paper. So when I'm making those drawings, I still like to use pen and paper sometimes. The tattoo design I made for Young was also created with pen and paper, and I used a set of Micron pens. When I first started out making these drawings, I was just using like a regular Sharpie pen, like one of those fine line Sharpie pens. You get them from Staples, like $3-4 for a 5-pack, and like computer paper. So you definitely don't need to spend a lot of money to be able to start. I didn't have different widths for the Sharpie pens. As you know, it either comes in like the fine one and then it goes like really thick with no in between. Whereas if you have a set of Micron pens, you definitely have more variety in between. So what I would do to kind of achieve a thicker line is I would outline it once and then I would go in again and make it thicker. But I think that process really helped me with kind of gaining more of a steady hand when I was drawing. And again, it was just really good for practice. Even though my illustration skills have developed and changed over the years, there's still a couple of pieces from when I first started out that I really enjoy. Like, I remember drawing this iris on the back of a composition notebook, and I think just the combination of the ink against that eco-friendly brown paper, it just looks really aesthetically pleasing. One of my other favorites is this koi fish that I drew, and I'm still really proud of this one. The next part is color, and this is definitely one of the longest parts of this process, so you want to take your time. What I do is I decrease the opacity of the outline layer, and then I create a bunch of new layers on top, a different layer for each petal. Having each petal on a different layer just gives me a little more control over the shape and the color if I want to kind of adjust those down the line without affecting the other petals that I already drew. Sometimes if I have a petal that uses multiple colors, like 2 colors, or it has like a different section on it, I like to use a clipping mask to deposit that second color just to give me a little more accuracy, and so I can stay within the confines of that original shape. I like to stick to more of a restricted color palette when I do my illustrations because I think this just makes the overall piece look more cohesive. So what I'll do is I'll pick one main color, which in this case was pink because I love pink, or more like a peachy pink. And then I'll kind of pick other colors with the color wheel that complement that main color. You can also adjust the color of each different layer by going into the adjustments panel and there's a section called hue, saturation, and brightness. And from here on, you can kind of toggle the different settings until you get to a color that you like. I actually used to hate coloring. I mean, I still hate coloring if it's like traditional coloring. I really don't like color pencils. Just the time it takes to painstakingly shade in and try to get like an even solid application. I'm not about that. But with digital art, it's so easy. You just drop the color in and that's it. I've definitely been experimenting with color a lot more in some of my other illustrations. I think before I would mainly just stick to black and white, which I still like doing, like that kind of monochromatic artwork. But it's been really fun to play around with including colors, and it's definitely something outside my comfort zone, but I really want to get better at it. So, you know, what's that thing from Adventure Time? The first step to being good at something. No, sucking at something is the first step to kind of being good at it. Once I finish all the different layers or petals for one flower, I like to group them all together and flatten it. And the reason I do this is because Procreate has a limit on the amount of layers that you can include in a specific art file. And this amount changes depending on the size of your artboard. Now, I don't know what the exact limit was for this piece, but this is just a better way to keep everything organized and condensed, and you don't like 100 different layers and you're like, oh, where's my flower? So I think this coloring process took about 1 to 2 hours while I was watching Netflix. And once I finish this portion, finally, we go on to the 5th step, which is adding texture. And in my opinion, I think this really just brings it all together. So I will create a new layer on top of the color, and I'll go in with the noise brush. I make it the largest size available, and I use white, and I just shade the entire thing in. And then I will lower the opacity of that layer until it gets to the point where it looks like that kind of gritty texture without being like too overwhelming. From there on, I'll use the clipping mask tool so it only applies to the actual flowers and leaves and not the background. So the last step is adding in the text. And you can do this step in Procreate because they do have a text tool that they added. I believe it was last year. I personally like to work in InDesign when I'm doing anything involving text or layouts because I feel like this gives me more flexibility. I also don't have a keyboard attachment for my iPad, so it's really just more efficient for me to work on my desktop. So I will either export my artwork as a JPEG or a PSD, depending on if I would want to make more tweaks to the actual artwork itself before I add the text. And then I will import that into InDesign. On a new layer, I will start putting in the text, playing around with different fonts until I get to a point where I'm happy with it. And with this banner, I actually ended up revising it a few days later because I added in my middle name, which is Haejin, my Korean name. Once you're done with your artwork, just export it as a JPEG, upload it to YouTube, and you're done. Let me know if there's anything else you guys would want to see regarding illustration or design, tutorials, or drawing challenges. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.